Hi, welcome to video 2. In this video of the 5-part series for the rainbow quilt, we're going to be working on the star block. The star block is just our regular 8-pointed star that you see in very many quilts, but this method we're using 6.5-inch half square triangles to make the star from the beginning. So if you would like to join me, this video is going to be pretty quick. Let me show you how I do it. As before with the sunblock, I'm starting with two 10-inch squares. I'm just going to put them together and sew all the way around, like this. If you get a little kink at the end of your trip around your blocks, don't worry about it. It will be released when we make our cuts. Now, when I make these cuts, I'm making them as if I didn't have a ruler that reached completely across the diagonal. If you have a ruler that's longer, you don't need to do this, but I'm just going to make a crease in the center after folding it each way. Make a nice sharp one and keep the lighter side up. That will help a lot. Also, I put my hand over the folds and that creates a shadow so I can see my folds a little better. And then I make a teeny tiny cross right there in the middle so I know where middle is. And I'm keeping it small so that pencil mark doesn't end up outside of the seam allowance. Now, when I line up my ruler, I want to put it at the intersection of my thread on the bottom right through the center mark I just made, and I want to try to use the 45-degree angle on my ruler and line that up with the bottom stitching. I cut it halfway, I flip it up so I can clearly see the cut I've already made, and then I slide my ruler up so that it goes through the intersection of my stitches on the top left and finish my cut. Now you'll see a lot of people make the second cut with their halves still together, but you don't have to do that. I usually move mine out of the way so I can see the straight edge that I've just cut, and then I can use the measurement on my ruler and line that up with my cut edge, have the ruler through the center mark that I just drew and through the intersection of my stitches in the corner. The whole point is to try to get a nice 90-degree angle in the center of what was your pair of 10-inch squares so that you have square squares. Now, we're going to square these up to 6.5 inches, but you should have just enough left so that you can get a nice square, because sometimes your stitching affects the way your square turns out, which is why I square mine up after I open them instead of trying to square them up while they're still in triangle form. So I'm going through this thing here like I did with the last sun block, where I'm going to press half of my seam allowances towards the color and half towards the gray. You don't have to do this. I ended up mixing up my blocks anyway, so I ended up flipping some of the seams. But the reason why I do this, just so you know, is because I'm going to be using these in pairs, and I want to alternate the half square triangles so that two are towards the color and two are away from the color in each block that I make. And that way I can nest those seams and get nice points in my blocks. So I know that I'm going to be using pairs, so I am doing pairs in opposite directions. But what I should have done is taken one that was with the seam allowances towards the gray and one with the seam allowances away from or towards the color. for each pair of blocks. But I didn't do that. I hope that makes sense and wasn't more confusing. I would suggest that you press your seams however you want to press them, and then if you have to flip them later, flip them. Sorry if you heard that explosion. It's the 3rd of July. I live in a tourist town and people are already popping fireworks, but Sheila's got work to do, so if you hear the fireworks, I apologize. So I do like to give these a good press before squaring them up. Remember that we've cut all these on the bias, so they're very stretchable. So while you're pressing your blocks, be careful not to rub hard on them. You don't want to distort the blocks. Now I keep a little piece of tape on the diagonal when I'm cutting half square triangles so that I can just slide it right up next to the fold and not worry too much about measuring. I just got to get get it centered on the block and let the tape kind of press up against my fold, and I get great square block. Here I have 2 sets of half square triangles that measure 6.5 inches, but you only need 4 to make either one of these blocks. I'm going to make a positive block and a negative block, so I have 8 sitting here. If you want to use a 4 at a time, sorry, if you want to use a 2 at a time or 8 at a time method to make your 6.5 inch half square triangles, I'll put the numbers up right now. I do find that having that little bit of extra stretch from using the 4 at a time method comes in handy when making this particular quilt. I'm going to set 4 of these half square triangles aside. You don't have to have blocks that are this scrappy. You could make either one of these with just 2 colors of fabric. Let's get my cutting mat here because we need to cut each of these into 4 equal parts. So right now they measure 6.5 inches. So we need to cut them so that they are 3.25 inches each way. So I'm just going to move my tape just outside the 3.25 inch mark here so that I can easily cut all of these blocks. I think that these 2 will be fine since they're short blocks. I want to be accurate with it because I'm going to be cutting a lot of blocks with this. All right, so 3.25 inches is center. So I'm going to cut all of these into quarters. I just slide it up to the fabric, give it a slice. And keep all of the pieces from each half square triangle together. But basically what you're making of this are 2 new half square triangles and 2 solid squares. I know I say it repeatedly, but using the tape to make a little jig makes the cutting go so much faster. And you're not buying a bunch of new rulers, you're just adjusting the rulers that you have. And the tape comes off cleanly. I had several people ask me in the last video what tape I use. I use, not sponsored, multi-surface frog tape, painter's tape that measures 1.88 inches. And I stack 4 layers and then I cut it into 1/4 inch strips, stick them on the wall next to me, and use them as needed. So that's what I use. I also have a video for that if you're interested. We're going to start by reassembling our half square triangles by placing each of the 4 pieces more or less in its original position. This is going to seem very similar to what we started with the sunblock, aside from the difference in the size that we cut. Remember, in the sunblock we cut 2.25 inches off the outside edges. In this case, we've cut 3¼ inches or cut each quarter in half. So we've got all of our color towards the center, and now we're going to make the layout for a positive block. And it's as simple as turning all of the color halves of the half square triangles towards the center of its quadrant. So, like this. We're just going to take our half square triangles and rotate them towards the center. There you go, Sheila. The center of each quadrant. So the red would go towards the center here, and the red would go towards the center here. And we're going to do that with all 4 quadrants. And there you have it, the positive star layout. And now we can just sew these blocks together in rows or columns or quadrants. I like to sew them in quadrants. And I'm actually going to kind of sew this in rows, but the best way to do it is in quadrants, in my opinion. And we'll kind of talk about that later after we get some things sewn together. But first, let's put together the negative star block. We're going to start by reassembling our half square triangles in the same locations, but with the gray towards the center. All right, so this puts us kind of back at our starting point with our 4 half square triangles. And now we're doing a negative star. So we're going to do a similar thing and turn the color that's in the center towards the center of its corresponding quadrant. So in this case, it's going to be the gray. We're just going to turn all the half square triangles with the gray pointing towards the center of its quadrant. Ta-da! And now we have the negative star with the exact same blocks that we just used. So the only reason I have 2 sets is so that I can do a negative and a positive. Let's go ahead and sew this negative star, and then we will cut the other ones into parts. I'm going to pull these off the board as they are and put them together in columns, but the better way, in my opinion, is to do them in quadrants, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Remember, you're working with biased edges, so be careful not to stretch anything out of whack as you're sewing these pieces together. Just let the feed dogs do the work. And I really should try to have my 1/4 inch seam allowances be 1/4 of an inch. That would help a lot. Let's get these pieces cut apart and we will lay this star out. I end up pressing these pieces in the direction so that they nest properly from top to bottom. In hindsight, what would have been better is if I pressed each one as an individual quadrant the way the bottom left quadrant is going to be pressed. So I'm going to go ahead through this and press it normally, but then we're going to pause and look at that bottom left quadrant, and I'll explain why that's, in my opinion, the best way to press all of these quadrants for the star block. What I'm doing now is placing all of the top pieces to the right so that when I press the seam allowance, it's going to be to the left. And then the odd number blocks are going to have their seam allowances pressed to the right. That way, when I flip that top piece on the bottom, the two seam allowances will nest and be pressed into one another by the presser foot. However, the way I'm doing it right now is from top to bottom as the block is laid out, so that this top block has one piece that's pressed towards the half square triangle. Well, both pieces are pressed towards the half square triangle, which is not the way it naturally wants to go. The bottom left piece, both pieces are pressed towards the square, which is the way it naturally wants to go. And that's better. If you press all of your quadrants the way they naturally want to go, you will get nesting all the way through the block. But let's go ahead and sew this together. So make sure that nesting is secure. Once I get to the nest, I'm going to adjust for my next part. Just grab the closest one to me. Nest. Line up that right hand side as best you can. I'm a little wobbly there. Next. And the way you know which side to sew is the side that's connected by the thread if you do it this way. And last. Don't want that to flip over on me. Okay, let's cut these apart. And my machine is still acting a little weird, so I have a little crease in there. But let's go ahead and press these all. And I fiddled with the middle of the blocks to get that, cute little forward patch in the middle of the forward patch, but don't worry about that. So just get all of these pressed. Now you'll notice that as I press these, some of them are pressed with, how do I want to say this? I started some of these pressed towards the half square triangle and some of them pressed towards the squares. If you press them all towards the squares to start with, then everything will work out. You don't have to do anything special. Just press them all the same way. First pressing towards the square. And then don't fiddle faddle with trying to get the little diamond in the middle. So let's pause because I want to talk about how these seam allowances are laid. The way my seams are, the top seams are in the same direction, so they're not going to nest. And my bottom seams are both down, so they're not going to nest. So I want to flip them. I want to make it so that this bottom right corner, the seam is up, and the top left corner, I want to make that seam down. Those two opposing corners are oriented the same way. And when I laid them out, I pressed those seam allowances towards the squares, the two squares in each quadrant. That is how I should have pressed all of the quadrants. So let's talk about that. It will give you the best result. The top right quadrant as the sample, pressing our seams towards the square. And then when you press the pairs together, you want to press towards the outside of the shape, or the colored square in this case. If you rotate that 90 degrees to the left, it's going to look like this. 90 degrees again, it'll look like this. Again, it'll look like this. If you look at the pink and the blue arrows, you'll see that they're in opposite directions. So those seams will nest, and they'll nest so that the right-hand side is up and the left-hand side is down, meaning you will be able to sew these together without putting a pin in, because your presser foot will press those nested seams together. And it'll work all the way around the block. I hope that makes sense. So we're back to what I actually did. It still worked out. It's just if you make them all the same, it'll be easier and you'll get a better result. Okay, so we're coming up on that nested seam. Next. And you can see my stitches, my seams are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They are actually pretty wonky, but I promise you this is going to turn out anyway. And that's why it's great for a beginner. You don't have to be so meticulous. All right, we're going to press these now, and we're going to press the top to the left and the bottom to the right. But because I didn't sew all of my seam allowances towards the square initially, when I was pairing my pieces, I have to deal with seams not nesting now at the top and bottom. So if you just do everything the same from the beginning, you'll get a better result. Now you might also want to nest these seams as well, because that's where your points are, inverse points are coming together. My machine is really acting strangely, and I think I'm going to have to take a break and find what's wrong. Now to get these pressed open, and I think I'm just going to press it to the side. And everything turned out well, even though I didn't have my seam allowances pressed ideally. It still worked. Even with my wonky seams, it still works. I've got a nice intersection in the middle and all around the star, and I really like it. So this is the negative star. I'm going to fix my sewing machine, and then we're going to work on the positive star. So see you in a bit. Okay, I think I got the sewing machine squared away, more or less. Let's do the positive star. So here we're starting with the color in the center. Our layout is with the half square triangles with the color towards the middle. So you see that they're all in the same place as before. So we're going to do the same thing with the positive part, just by turning the colored half square triangles towards the center of each quadrant. So it's just like the other one, except Now colors towards center instead of the black and white. And color towards the center. And there is our layout. So we're going to sew this just like we sewed the last one. I did it the same way as before. I don't know if I had caught on by this point that I should press the seam allowances all towards the square, but I think I did.
I know you can probably hear the vehicles outside, but can you hear the birds? That's the part that I like. I forgot to change the setting here, so. See what I'm doing? Let me raise this up a little bit. How about that?
All right, let's cut these apart. See how we did. So I did the same thing I did in the last one, whereas I went by the star shape and not just doing each quadrant the same way. But if you use the other process and not the one that I did here, it'll work great. I still got a good result doing it this way. Just the other way is better, in my opinion. And you know what? You know how to do this part, so let's speed things up and get to the end. The one thing I did want to point out here that I didn't point out before is the 1/4 inch that's left in the corners where you sew the half square triangles to the square. I'm just going to point those out before we flip all these pieces over to put together. And there you go.
Okay, nesting my seam on the side with the thread that has it's connecting. Let's get that middle matched up all the way across. That helps a lot. So I'm going to start slowly and hope that this does not eat. There we go. Make sure we're lined up here. This one.
So we have our 4 quadrants here. I'm cutting them apart and I'm looking at them and realizing that I've done the same thing I did with the first star. So I decided to do something a little different, which is to sew the pieces that nest together first. So I'm just sewing the left and right sides. Now I'm going to cut the bottom half from the top half, and I'm going to press the top half all towards the left and the bottom half all towards the right, so that I have 3 seams that are going to be to the left at the top and 3 seams, those vertical seams, are going to be to the right. So when I flip it over, you'll see better what I'm talking about. Of course, once they're flipped, they're going to be the opposite direction from the back side. So, you got to kind of force some of those seams that aren't pressed the easy way and give it a little spritz of water. That always helps the fabric to relax. And now I'm just going to press all 3 of the vertical seams to the left with it upside down, but to the right with it right side up. Press it from the front. Make sure those seams are open on the front side. And then on this one, all my seam allowances are going to go to the right with it right side up, which would be to the left with it upside down. I decided to just go ahead and get it started from the front so I didn't confuse myself. And I still confuse myself. It's correct though. So all 3 of those vertical seam allowances. And that's so that when I sew these 2 halves together, the 3 vertical seams will nest with the seams that are on top facing the presser foot so they can get pressed together and make a nice tight joint. I hope that makes sense. That's the second way you can achieve the look that you want with this block, but I stand by my opinion that the other way is the best way. So let's get this wrapped up.
So I'm just going to nest the first set of seams. See that? And then I'm going to line up the corner in the middle, in the top, and make sure we're actually sewing. And then as soon as I get my needle in that seam, I'm going to nest the middle, and then we're going to work our way there. And then I'm going to nest the bottom seam, and we're going to sew down there. And finally, I'm going to make sure that my corner is lined up here at the bottom.
And there we have it. I'm just going to press this to one side. I'm a little bit tired of pressing, but I'm going to get a little spritz of water and smooth it with my hands. I've got a nice joint at the center and all around the star. I'm very happy with the way this turned out. So you got 3 options for how to press these blocks, but it's up to you, of course. But I'm very happy with the way both of these star blocks turned out. I hope you'll give it a try and show me. I did open up sharing in the community tab, so if you make some blocks and you want to show me, I would love to see. All right, my friends, there you have it, the star block. It's a standard block that you could use in quilts, that you see in many quilts, made a little bit differently using 6.5-inch half square triangles. Now, if you found that the stability of your block is not to your liking, I recommend trying the 2 at a time method or the 8 at a time method of making half square triangles. They don't have to be this scrappy. They can all just be 2 colors. I'll put those numbers up on the screen, and that will give you a more stable star block. But that instability, that stretchiness from having biased edges using the 4 at a time method will help you out at the end, making the final block to get all of your pieces matched up properly, just in case you sew the way I do. So I hope you'll give this video a like. I hope you'll give the block a try. Please subscribe. It really helps my channel to grow, and I would love to see you next time. So select that notification bell, and I will see you for the next video. In case you're wondering, the next video will be the gem block. See you then. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See you soon.